Welcome to lesson 1.2. Now, we know that this is a trigonometry class. Well, the word trigonometry actually means the study of triangles. In 1.1, we did nothing with triangles. So, officially welcome to trigonometry. Today is the first day we work with triangles, specifically right triangles. So all the triangles you see today are going to have that little box in the corner. And in fact, we'll be dealing with right triangles for like 85-90% of this class. So, one of the keys that we talk about with right triangles is, you've probably heard before, Soh Cah Toa. Now, Soh Cah Toa, something you need to know about it, is it's just a memory trick. That's all it is. The reason your teacher has taught you Soh Cah Toa in the past is to help you memorize these equations. That is all it's there for. It's just a memory trick. So the first one we have is Soh Cah Toa. That stands for sine, the S, and then the O part is O over H. There we go. Soh Cah Toa. It's just there to help you memorize that sine is always opposite over hypotenuse. That's what it stands for. The next part we have is Cah. So there's our C for cosine. And Cah is A over H. There's our Cah. Soh Cah Toa. And it's just to help you memorize that cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Then we have tangent, Toa. So Toa, O over A. And that gives you Soh Cah Toa. The only reason we use this is, once again, to help you memorize these three equations and the order that they go in. That is its sole purpose. Now, before we move on to anything else, I want you to notice there's a theta attached to all of these things. That theta is just a variable. So you can kind of think of it as an x, a y, or a z. Basically, mathematicians forever ago decided that if we're measuring angles, we're going to use Greek letters instead of English letters to measure those. So anytime you see these Greek letters, that just means we're measuring an angle. So something like theta, or you have alpha, or let's see, over here we have beta, we have gamma. All of those are just Greek letters that signify this is an angle. Now, theta is the most common one that we use. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because you must always have an angle attached to your trig function. If I just wrote sin plus cos, that actually doesn't make any sense at all. It would need an angle attached to it. So like sine of 17 degrees plus cosine of pi half. Something like that, where you have angles attached to them. Or if you don't know what the angle is, we put theta there to signify there is an angle here, but I don't know what it is. So the reason I'm talking about this is a lot of students will get a little lazy and they'll just start writing things like this. You will lose points on tests and exams if you write it like that. Sine, cosine, tangent, all your trig functions must be paired with an angle or they are incomplete. So now that we've talked about all of that good stuff, let's talk about these ones over here. We have cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Now, these are paired with the one across from them. And what I mean by paired is the relationship between them is for cosecant, all you have to do is take the sign and flip the fraction. So cosecant is h over o. Secant, take the cosine, flip the fraction, h over a. Cotangent, take the tangent, flip the fraction, a over o. And that's how you find these three. They just take these three originals and flip them. That's what's happening here. Now, it might be hard to memorize this. I personally think we probably should have done cosine with cosecant and sine with secant, but we didn't. Mathematicians decided this is how it is. So I usually try to memorize it as the S's are paired with the C's. Sine and cosecant, cosine and secant. The S's are paired with the C's. But you just have to remember which ones are paired together. Now that we've defined Soh Cah Toa and we have all our trig functions labeled, let's talk about labeling our triangle. There are 3 sides on a triangle. On a right triangle, we call those hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. Now, I've been doing trig for a couple years at this point, and I still label my triangle the exact same way every time. I always label the hypotenuse first. You may have been taught in the past that the hypotenuse is the longest side. That's not necessarily the best way to remember it because sometimes the sides are really close to each other and it's hard to tell which one is longest. So the better way to tell is the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. So I find the right angle, which always has that little box, go across from that right angle, and that is always my hypotenuse. And that never, ever, ever moves. Just go across from the right angle. There's your hypotenuse every single time. Now, opposite and adjacent do move. They change based on what angle in the triangle you're focusing on. So you'll notice in this triangle, we have this angle highlighted. So that means that's the angle I'm focusing on. So now I can go across from the angle I'm focusing on, and that gives me the opposite side. You can kind of think of it like your neighbors. The neighbor that lives across the street from you is your opposite neighbor. They live opposite your house. So that's how I always do it. I always find the hypotenuse first. It's the easiest to go across from the right angle. Then I find opposite, find what angle you're focusing on, go across from that, there's your opposite. And then adjacent is whatever side is left. It's just the third side. We also can think of it as adjacent to this angle I'm focusing on. It's next to. But I don't like to think of it that way because the hypotenuse is also next to the angle. And it's kind of easy to get those confused. That's why I always do hypotenuse first, then opposite. And adjacent is just what's left over. So now that we have all those labeled, it's pretty easy to fill in these. So let's give you an example of that in example 1. First thing we do is label our triangle. Now remember, I always do hypotenuse first. It's the easiest. Go across from that right angle. There's my hypotenuse. Check. Find the angle you're focusing on. There we go. Go across from the angle you're focusing on, and that is your opposite. Check. Then, whatever side is left over, that is your adjacent. Check. And now that we have that all labeled, now we can find sine, cosine, and tangent. Notice I'm putting alpha in there now because that's the name of the angle I'm focusing on. So I got this. Now I know these are going to be fractions, and I start by remembering my memory trick. Soh Cah, getting ahead of myself. Cah Toa. And then these ones, I'll just take whatever fractions I get and flip them. And now that I've labeled my triangle, it's really just to fill in the blank. So I'm actually, here, let's color code this for you guys. I did my A's orange, and my hypotenuses I did yellow. So I just have to look at what side matches and fill in the number. My O side is 4, so that goes there. My H side is 5, so that goes there. And you're done. So sine of alpha is 4/5. That's your answer. You're finished. Now cosine, my A side was 3 and my H side was 5. I'm done. There's cosine. And finally tangent, my O side was 4 and my A side was 3. You're done. That's all. Now, can you see that if I changed what angle I'm focusing on, so if I focused on this one instead, now this one would be opposite because now it's across from the angle I'm focusing on, and this would be adjacent, which would change my fractions. So just make sure you're always looking at what angle is labeled. That's the one you're focusing on. Now, to find the rest of them, all you have to do is flip these fractions. So cosecant is sine flipped, so that becomes 5/4. Secant is cosine flipped, so that becomes 5/3. And cotangent is tangent flipped, so that becomes 3/4. And we're done. That's trigonometry in a nutshell. That is Soh Cah Toa. That is how it works. That is everything you need to know about it. You label your triangle, make sure you label all the sides the right way, and then you remember Soh Cah Toa and fill in the fractions, and you're done. That is all you need to know about it. So in the next video, we're going to build more on this right triangle trigonometry stuff on Soh Cah Toa by talking about how trig works with similar triangles. I'll see you there.